Hi, my name is Marie Pampanin, and I am your host of Yoga Therapy, The Alchemy of Healing. If you enjoy the subject matter or know somebody that might, please pass on our links as well as hitting the like and or subscribe button. Maybe even show us a little bit of extra love and do both. Thank you so much. Hello, Marlysa.
Hi.
Hi. Um, as usual, I'm very excited because I just love who I get to interview, and you are the one of the top people that I've been hoping I would be able to interview. So thank you very much for coming on. You are Marlysa Sullivan, and you were one of my professors at Maryland University of Integrative Health, and you are a physical therapist, a certified yoga therapist, and an author.
That's my favorite
And
one.
very loved. Yes, you are very loved by many of us. Um, so again, thank you so much for coming on today. One of the first things that I ask people when they come on is just to tell me and share with our audience a little bit about your yoga journey to becoming a yoga therapist and how that impacted you.
Yeah, and just let me know if I go on too long. You can interrupt, direct at other places if you like. Yeah, so my path as a yoga therapist was that I was actually first interested in medical anthropology and the kind of role spirituality plays in healing. I was kind of figuring out what I was doing with that, and I ended up going into the field of physical therapy. And then once I was a physical therapist, I had studied yoga a little bit, and I was really interested in more the spiritual meditative aspects of it. So in my yoga teacher training, I kind of sought out trainings that had less of the asana focus and the physical focus and more on the kind of spiritual as well as meditative components. So I ended up actually working one-on-one for years with a yoga therapist who was influenced by Kripalu and Phoenix Rising, studied with other Kripalu yoga teachers. I would say that's like my main lineage of influence. Um, and I started integrating, I worked in PT with people who had chronic pain. And so I was really interested in this complexity and how we can use yoga as this way to really focus on how what's happening in the body and the mind, how those are connected, and how we can use these practices to connect people to a deeper sense of who they are beyond their diagnoses that they may have, beyond their labels.
Hmm. Well, that was pretty quick. That wasn't too long.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be longer, but you never know.
That's wonderful. Okay, so one of the things that kind of drew me to you and your one of your books uh, is something that we're going to be talking about today. But you also said that you worked with chronic pain and you have another book that you wrote. And if you have it close by, maybe you can show it to us.
It's called Yoga and Science in Pain Care. It's with Shelley Prosko and Neil Pearson. We all edit it together. We have many authors, and the intention is to give this biopsychosocial spiritual understanding of pain through the lens of yoga.
Yeah. And before we go digging into this book, you said you were writing another book.
Yeah, I'm working on a new book with Amy
Okay.
Wheeler. And we're hoping that that one continues to go in this like step of how is it that we integrate yoga into healthcare and yoga therapy into healthcare? Like, what does that really mean? It probably has a bit more even practical application. And my main influences in yoga have really been the Bhagavad Gita, and the Mahabharata because I enjoy story and that kind of teaches me so much and touches me. Her
Yeah.
main influence is the Yoga Sutras. So it's really combining kind of where I've been in my yoga path with the work that a lot of people think of in yoga, which is the Yoga Sutras. So we're really like kind of going deep into the Yoga Sutras and into an assessment model to really look at
Yeah.
like yoga as part of integrative health.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
So that kind of touches on a couple of questions that I have, but let's start off with one of the main focuses that I thought we could have today, because I think this is really important in terms of, how yoga therapy can be beneficial, to the general public in terms of chronic health, chronic pain, any other health
And
issues,
health.
physical therapy, right?
Yeah.
And so it really, at least for me, personally, one of the biggest things that really kind of struck home for me was when I started reading about the allostatic load and the polyvagal theory. So I was hoping that we can kind of move into that, but really kind of looking at it from the lens of somebody who may not know a lot about polyvagal theory and Stephen Porges' work and the many papers that are out there in books. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what really stuck out when I first learned about polyvagal theory and why I really kind of went deep in it was this idea of really coming out of like a diagnosis-driven healthcare model. Like when we're
mhm,
looking at yoga therapy, we're looking at something so intrinsically holistic and integrative that you can't really pull the pieces of like body and mind and spirit apart. And so the neural platforms give us that base. So just like kind of in this summary of what polyvagal theory offers is this idea that our autonomic nervous system, at that part of our nervous system that acts without us thinking. So it, makes our heart beat, it helps our breath rate, it creates muscle tension or relaxation, it determines like the stress hormones going in your body. Like it's this amazing communicator and integrator of all the systems of our body. And what polyvagal theory looks at is the way that without us having to think about it, our autonomic nervous system is always setting us up for either danger or safety. So my autonomic nervous system right now is looking at this situation I'm in, and it's assessing like I know you. I'm at my house, so I have this great view of a tree. I had some things happen earlier in the day, so it begins to set a level of activation based on whether my nervous system feels safe or in threat.
mhm,
And whatever my autonomic nervous system sets at, it's going to affect what my physiology is doing, what my emotions and my thoughts are like, and even what my behavior is. So we can look at, instead of like trying to look at symptoms of saying this is the mood and mind and emotions. This is her physiology. This is how she's acting out in the world. We kind of come underneath that to say, like, her nervous system is in a state of defensive mobilization, like that sympathetic response, or
mhm,
it's in some kind of state of safety, whether that's like safety that has creativity and action, like that stress performance curve, or whether we're, connected to people around us, or whether we're in stillness, that there's this continuum of safety that we can be set at. So when we look at the practice of yoga, instead of saying, oh, it's, anxiety and it's low back pain and it's like social, nervous social anxiety as well, like difficulty connection to others. Instead, we can say, like, what is the set of the nervous system? And then how do
mhm,
we apply the practices to the nervous system so that it changes what's happening in the body, the mind, and the behavior? And that's very
mhm,
much in line with this idea in yoga of the gunas, that like there's these underlying qualities that give rise to whatever's happening in my body, whatever's happening in my mind, whatever's happening in how I'm interacting with the world. And instead of like trying to like suss out all these disparate aspects, we can come underneath and affect that, and that creates change.
absolutely. That's wonderful. Thank you for saying that so succinctly. I appreciate that. So, how does this help us as yoga therapists to work with clients?
I think it really is like the vital piece that helps us shift from a diagnosis symptom-based model. So when we look at kind of traditional healthcare, how it's practiced right now. It is very much, symptom diagnosis driven, and it has a lot of pluses. There's a lot of good things about it, and it's not necessarily helping us move towards greater well-being. And so by kind of working in this yoga therapy model, it helps us to consider how do we set the person to safety? How do we bring them that greater connection with who they are? How do we help them align with their own inner truth that's outside of their diagnosis, that's outside of their condition? So, when people kind of get this, what they end up saying is like, I'm someone that has pain, but I'm no longer my pain. That I'm someone experiencing multiple sclerosis, but I'm not my multiple sclerosis. So it's really about this de-identification with um, what might be happening in the physiology or in the mind to come into a greater truth of who they are. And by connecting to that, enact change in the body, the mind, and everything about themselves.
Nice. So one of the things that I have been struck by is how much research is now being done and continues to grow in terms of the ability to see why yoga therapy works within the Western model.
Hmm.
Would you like to speak into that?
Yeah, there is a lot. I'm just gonna say that. Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
No, but there is, right? And it's great to see how the field of yoga research has really grown. And there's different like bibliometric analyses looking at like this exponential growth of research. And I think so there's a lot of research for yoga for low back pain, especially. There's
Mhm.
some great research in yoga for PTSD. And I think kind of some of the next stages in yoga research are about looking at even the way that yoga has a special place for co-occurring physical and mental health. So like pain
Mhm.
and PTSD, which often coexist. And like this idea of how we shift these neural platforms, how we shift what's happening underneath in the gunas, that does create an effect for physical and mental health at the same time. So that it's
Mhm.
very complementary to what a PT might do or a psychotherapist or social worker might do, but it's this place in the middle where we're helping the person process and integrate both of those practices. So it really, I see yoga therapy as being this essential part of an interdisciplinary team where we can help what's happening in the physical therapy world and the psychotherapy world, and we can bring that together.
Absolutely. Nice. And you have brought up chronic pain. So one of the things, I think a lot of us have either gone through, know somebody who's experiencing, or will experience some form of chronic pain. How does yoga therapy and specifically, some techniques help to assist people to regulate nervous system and find a little bit more balance in their bodies?
So, I'll answer it in a couple different ways, I think, but one of the things about chronic pain, like kind of the science of pain, is a lot of this is based on the work of Lorimer Moseley, is that the nervous system really becomes not just dysregulated in a sympathetic, parasympathetic way, but it
Mhm.
actually becomes sensitized, and that's a really difficult word to use. So I don't often use it with with people because it in people's head it means, oh, you're too sensitive. But really what it
Mhm.
means, like if you've ever had a migraine, like lights are brighter, sounds are louder, smells are stronger, and it's because the threshold for your nervous system to take in information has actually lowered. So in a normal nervous system, a non-painful nervous system, let's say it takes, a certain amount of stimulus in order for the nerve to activate and send information up. In a sensitized nervous system, it takes much less. So it's
Yeah,
it's 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 almost like the nervous system becomes very vigilant and it takes so much information in because it's always on guard. So when we're looking at the nervous system in pain, we're looking at this autonomic dysregulation of like stress sympathetic response, but we're also looking at the way that the nervous system misperceives safe stimuli as dangerous. And so how do we help create that discernment? So yoga practices definitely focus on autonomic regulation, like
Yeah.
longer exhales, diaphragmatic breathing. For some people, it's slow rhythmic movement. For other people, it's more restorative postures. Meditation, of course. But then the other thing that we can do with yoga is go that next step. It's kind of an experiential pain education where we're helping people to build this kind of discernment, this kind of mindful awareness of noticing when stimulus comes in, how their body, mind reacts to it and responds and interprets it. And then yoga very much is about reinterpreting that, reconceptualizing that, like helping us to re-identify stimuli as safe when we were identifying it as dangerous. So ultimately, kind of the bigger effect to me about yoga and pain is this capacity to help the nervous system not be so overwhelmed and not to be so hypervigilant and to more
Mhm.
accurately be able to respond to the environment.
Yes. So, with all of this research that's now coming out, we can see the impact, as to how yoga does help with people. Now, you do a lot of research yourself.
I have in the past, yes.
Yes, yes, in the past.
Currently not, but I have.
So, in the past, what are some of the things that have come up for you around research and helping to kind of have people know why we are doing the research that we are doing? And by we, I mean other yoga therapists, and I do very little.
Like, are you like kind of where I see the limitations in research or?
No, I think more of the exploration of why we're doing it now and how, because I think I want to say maybe like 20 years ago, right? Yoga was just starting to kind of hit mainstream. And
Mhm.
that's not about right, about 20 years ago. Maybe in
Maybe. I'll
India,
say yes. We'll
but
say
here
yes.
in the United States, here in the United States, right? And then, it was seen more as this here in the United States, more as this, kind of hippie, white people doing yoga, right?
Mm.
And then as more and more people began to come into yoga, I think there's been more and more research that has been showing why, yoga has been helping and been helpful. So my question is more around, as we do more research and as the research has been coming out, um, for people who are interested in either, what yoga therapy is, becoming a yoga therapist, or just, for their own, educational purposes. What are some of the things, if they want to go, into this research area, what would be some of the things that they might see, find to help support, what it is that we're doing as yoga therapists?
There has been a growth in the interest of complementary and integrative health practices.
Mhm.
And over, like you said, maybe 20 years, 15 years, who knows?
Yes.
And part of that is really this search for non-pharmacological measures or non-pharmacological practices that like there's certainly a need for medication sometimes, there's a need for surgery
Mhm.
sometimes, but at the same time they have their limitations. So I think, really like we came up on what those limitations were. And so in looking for other kinds of practices, yoga is one of those complementary integrative healthcare practices. And a lot of people do yoga and they were seeing the benefits for themselves. And like most people who meet a yogi find that yogis are very passionate about our practice. We're like, it's the best thing ever. So we get really passionate. And then, and so I think, there were researchers that were interested in it. There was more information about it. So I definitely think that came to light. I think in looking at as a yoga therapist, um, I think there's two parts. Is like there's the more mechanistic research, which is like um, and even more theoretical, which is more of what I've done, is things like the Polyvagal paper or the eudaimonic well-being paper. Like, how do we talk to people in their language of healthcare for how yoga is a complementary practice, that it should be part of an interdisciplinary team. So, when we're looking at the unique place of yoga, it's this effect on the autonomic nervous system. It's this effect on connecting to values and meaning and purpose. That those are really important pieces that other fields might not focus on in the same embodied way.
Yeah.
Um, so I think those are, and then I think, if you're looking for specific populations, that's always helpful too, to look at what what research there is. Like I said, there's a lot for low back pain and PTSD. I don't know that there's a lot for like shoulder pain, but there's like a pretty good bit for Parkinson's and multiple
Hmm.
sclerosis. So I think, looking up populations is good, but I think also looking at more the mechanisms to me, but that might be because I like theory a lot. I like
Yeah.
philosophy a lot. So for me, that's been really helpful to try to explain to people like why? Like why am I doing yoga with this person? Like why is that important or interesting?
Yeah, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with that because I feel like, having done yoga for many years and then eventually moving into becoming a yoga therapist, I didn't even understand the breath work, you know.
Yeah.
I mean that was I knew that I felt good when I was doing yoga. I knew that my students felt good when they were doing yoga, but I didn't necessarily understand the mechanisms behind it. And as it comes more into the forefront of being an integrated practice, being able to see from more of a Western, you know, vantage point, this is why it does work. It's not just us breathing
Well,
and
and I think too, like the other one of the things that I think is so powerful about research too is like what works for me isn't going to work for everybody. Like, I'm a person that loves back bends. I could do like the breath practice of Kapalabhati and go to sleep right away. Like, like not what works for me doesn't work for everyone. And so by reading
right,
research, I think you really come to these like, oh, it doesn't have to be this asana. There's no like one magic posture. There's no one magic breath. But by understanding like this idea is that I'm focusing on autonomic regulation, I'm focusing on connection to a deeper meaning, then you really are able to modify and adapt and make yoga really accessible to the person in front of you. So I think that's part of the power of research is like answering the why question so that then like the, for this person that has a very different response to me or different ability to me, that we can really find what it is that they need for them.
right, right. And I love that you point out that what works for me may not work for you, because that's one of the things about yoga therapy is that, when we do work with people, it's not a one size fits all. We
Yeah,
are looking at them, as a whole person and creating, this practice for them with them, right?
yeah.
And having them, being a part of their own healing process, which is something that I love about yoga therapy. I absolutely love it. Um, so with you and the research and, authoring some amazing books, um, and one of the things that you did bring up earlier were the gunas.
Mhm.
Um, would you mind maybe kind of unpacking that a little bit so that people understand, what gunas are and how they work in the yoga therapy model?
Yeah. Um, so in yoga and yoga philosophy, the idea is that we're made up of an unchanging part of us that's always present. And like as Purusha, this unchanging piece of us that has always been, will always be, that we're deeply connected to. That's our essential nature. But then outside of that, we have our material nature. It's everything about my body, everything about my mind, everything about the world around me. So that anything that changes is material nature, as opposed to like spirit. And so that material nature is made up of three qualities. And these three qualities or gunas are the quality of activity, activation, which is Rajaguna, the quality of clarity, which is Sattvaguna, and the quality of like stillness to inertia, which is Tamaguna. So you could take any of your thoughts and you could say, is this thought, what is the balance of activation of Rajaguna? What is the amount of clarity of Sattvaguna? What is the amount of Tamaguna of stillness to kind of lethargy? You could take your physical body and say, like, my physical body right now, like I feel Rajaguna in like my chest and my shoulders because there's some tightness, there's some activation.
Yeah.
I could say that there's some Sattvaguna, some clarity in the way that my body feels also light overall, and that there is some Tamaguna, this kind of like kind of tiredness or kind of mass weightedness in my low back. So I could look at like anything that I'm experiencing in my body, my mind, the earth, like a tree, has more of that tamaguna, that weightedness, than the
Mhm.
sun that has more rajaguna, that activity. So the idea of the gunas is that you're looking at what are the underlying qualities that something has, so that when I'm working with a client, do they have an overwhelm of that kind of rajaguna, of that activation, and I need to find practices that ground them. Do they
Yeah.
have like an overwhelm of tamaguna, that like real lethargy and kind of dullness that they need to get enlivened a little bit, so that you can use that as a way that you're evaluating and assessing people and then applying the practices. So you're not applying yoga for back pain. I might see two people with back pain, but I might give one person a practice of balancing Raja to really kind of
Mhm.
ground. I might give another person a practice that helps to enliven because they have a lot of tamaguna.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for laying that out for us, especially if somebody doesn't know what gunas are. And
Yeah,
like she said,
hopefully I can
gunas.
teach you from that. So
Yeah. So one of the amazing things that I also found with reading your book is as you were going through and connecting the dots, you used a lot of yogic philosophy um, that, you know, a lot of people might think of yoga as religious um, versus philosophy. Could you speak into that a little bit?
yeah, so I think, there's a bit of research around like this difference between spirituality and religion. And, that religion is, kind of often described almost as the dressing of spirituality, where it's like the kind of service you do, the kind of ritual, it's like the things, whereas the
Yeah.
spirituality is like the essence of how you connect. And in the research on spirituality, they talk about it as usually there's some sense of connectedness, either to yourself or something existential. There's usually this idea of meaning and purpose inherent in spiritual traditions, but it can look different in different religions. That there's usually some idea of working with values, or like yeah, values, I'll say it that way. Yoga philosophy is working with yoga spirituality, and it's working with this idea of how is it that we come to be in this world? What is our, like, the idea, like at the essence of yoga philosophy, it's like there is suffering in the world. How do we help alleviate it? And what is a path to its alleviation? So, while there is like asana, in the Yoga Sutras, I think it's just like one sutra that's devoted to asana. But really it's a path to alleviate suffering. So in order to really practice yoga, you are practicing this spiritual philosophical path that is about helping you to identify your sources of suffering and to help with their alleviation.
Nice. Um, if somebody didn't know anything about yoga at all, what would be one thing that you might share with them?
Depends what they want to know, but what I would want them to know, I'll say it that way, is that like yoga is a method of connecting deeply to yourself, like to your truth and your authenticity. And that ultimately that's where yoga like
that's where yoga has its effect, like when you connect deep to your sense of authenticity and your sense of self, autonomic regulation happens. Better social connection happens. A more positive mood and happiness and hope happens. But like
Mhm.
it's really through like all of those are on the outside. And when yoga really becomes who you are, it's because it's created that depth of connecting to who you really are.
Yeah, I love that. One of the other things that you brought up was PTSD and, having a lot of connections into, the military and, some other personal, growing up in foster homes and group homes. There's a lot of people that walk around not necessarily knowing that they might be triggered or they aren't necessarily connected to themselves because they have these memories of what other people told them, or the things that they've seen. And so when it comes to yoga therapy and having the ability to find that connection to oneself and finding purpose and hope, that's huge. That is absolutely huge. And being able to understand that what they're feeling and sensing in their body isn't who they are, and being able to understand that what they're feeling and sensing in their body isn't who they are, it's just what they're experiencing, right?
Yeah.
This is all the stuff that you've, gone over. And so when people are trying to find their healing path, right? Because I think at some point, a lot of us do. We go in search of, how do we find this healing path? And we don't always know that part of that path is emotional regulate, emotional, physical, emotional, regulation, of our nervous system, right? And of our emotions and finding that balance, again, speaking, into the gunas. Um, and also even just using the poses because the poses themselves, you know, one set of poses can be used to activate, one can be used to rest. And I know for me personally, rest was something I had to learn to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's me too. Like I don't think that I could have done like I started off in more of a vinyasa sun
Yeah,
salutation based yoga, and that's definitely what I needed.
yeah,
And then after years of practice, I could be still and I could do restorative
yeah.
yoga and I could do yoga nidra and like I could rest in that deeper stillness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, coming into that piece of like rest. Right now it's winter, and part of what I'm doing in some of my classes is, you know, looking at clients and looking at my, students and saying, hey, you know what? It's okay. It's winter.
Yeah,
We can
exactly.
find rest.
Time
It's
to
time to
hibernate.
rest. It's a little cold and dark. Um, so I guess the point that I was trying to get to is that, with everything that you shared and how yoga therapy can be helpful, you know, with chronic pain and PTSD, is there any research that you're aware of that you might be able to share with us around PTSD in terms of like books, research papers, anything that people might kind of want to go look at?
Yeah.
Again, great book.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. But yeah, I mean, there's interesting research right now, that Ursula Kelly did. And it's on yoga and PTSD, and it looks at, PTSD in a veteran population. I think it's women veterans, and it found interesting findings when they compared yoga to like maybe it was CBT or CPT, one of the two. But it found that like there were some similar findings, and that like and that people really enjoyed the yoga, and it showed that yoga was really effective and useful and necessary adjunctive treatment. So I think that's a really great paper. That paper, it seems like.
I do.
Yeah, that's a great one. And then of course there's like The Body Keeps a Score with Bessel van der Kolk,
Yeah.
an older book, but it's a fabulous book.
Yeah.
And I'll have to think about what else. But there, I think a lot of the polyvagal theory resources, like
Hmm.
that has a lot of people in the world of polyvagal theory, are psychotherapists. So Deb Dana has written some different
Yeah.
articles and books as well.
Yeah. She's done a lot of writing on it. And I want to say
I guess I
Deb
can give
Dana's books are a little bit easier to read.
I can give you another book that I have a chapter in. It's just came out. I think it came out actually like February. It might be coming out February 5th, but they mailed us a copy. It's called Somatic Oriented Therapies, and it's with Dr. Porges and two other authors.
Oh,
And they're just
nice.
chapters from different people.
Okay.
So I guess, but we're talking about yoga. So mine's about mindful movement, but I think Ariel Schwartz has a chapter in here too. If I'm not
Okay.
about that, that might be more to do with yoga. I got off topic. Sorry. It's PTSD.
It's totally okay. I think that, no matter who's, listening in terms of wanting to find ways to, balance out their own lives and their nervous systems, right? Anything, is always a good thing to go into. Funny story about Ursula. When we went to present at Kripalu,
Yeah.
we didn't realize Meredith and I were sitting together and she was sitting in front of us and she turned around to talk to us without knowing what we were presenting to follow. And
Oh,
we
yeah.
actually
Oh,
had
that's
her,
right. I remember that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a warm spot that I have for her also as well,
Yeah.
because it was like,
It's very cool. Yeah.
so yeah. So that was really a cool thing to find and do and see. So is there a space that people can find you if they had any, questions or if they wanted to work with you?
I do have a website. My website is marlysasullivan.com. So that's probably the best place. I haven't really been doing social media. I kind of dropped off of it. It's a lot. So, I guess my website, I think there's a contact us button there.
Yeah. And we'll have that all also in our notes, but the show notes, but I just wanted to give a little plug out there.
Thank you.
And in terms of your books, where can we find those?
You can find them at Amazon. I know that, and I'm sure you can order it other. I think you can order them off Barnes and Nobles too. Yeah.
Good. Can they also order them off of your website or
No, it'll just link to the Amazon.
okay,
Yeah, I should have a
awesome.
link to Barnes and Noble too, but I don't.
So with this other book that might be coming out, when do you think that one might come out? Or
I
is
mean,
that a kind of a wait and see?
it'll probably be like a year because we have to finish writing it, and then they have to like do whatever they do to publish it. So,
Okay.
probably a year and a half, maybe a year. Let's say a year and be hopeful.
Yes. Yes, we'll put it out there. 1 year. 1 year. Is there any parting words that you would like to share with people who are new to yoga therapy or just looking into it?
I guess like a parting words would be just this like for me what we kind of said earlier, but like just how important what yoga can really offer us at its very depths, and like
Yeah.
whatever that might mean to you, like you talked about like religion or whatever, and it's like there's so many ways to look at that, and there's a way that we can really like contact this yoga philosophy outside of that, where we're helping it to understand at a deeper level who we are and how that connects to everyone around us, and like how is it that you might want to be oriented to that process, like that. How is it that the practice, what does it mean for yoga to connect you to what's really most meaningful to you and your most authentic space, so that you can share that with others, and you can connect with others in that way. So I think that would,
Thank you.
yeah.
Marlysa, thank you for taking the time to come on and let me interview you.
This was
Promised I would keep it under an hour.
I know, I really appreciate it. It was really fun. I love talking about this stuff. Like once I get talking about it, I can talk about it all day. So thank you. I feel very rejuvenated from our talk. So
Yay! That's awesome. Well, if you ever need to be rejuvenated again, let me know and we can have
okay.
another conversation. So I'm going to put it out there that at least in a year,
Yeah, we'll
you'll be
revisit it
back on
here.
to talk about your new book.
Sounds good.
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. If you would like to support this content, hit the like button, subscribe, or leave a comment. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a fabulous day.